Welcome to another episode of the Trivia Power Hour Gaming, the show where we look at gaming secrets, Easter eggs, facts, and trivia you want to know about. If you know of any more trivia, or have a game, series, or developer you want me to cover, let me know in the comments, like the video, and consider subscribing. Also, make sure to stick around to the end for where I'll announce what the focus of the next episode will be. But, for now, let's get right into the trivia. Today, we're doing our first list video on the top 10 forgotten games made by big developers. This list was chosen based on how surprising the games are to have come from that developer, and there are some in here I'm sure you'd never expect, so let's get right into it. Number 10, Sonic Team. There are some studios who are made to do one thing, or at least be known for one thing, and Sonic Team is about the best example I can think of. For the first 5 games they developed, their name held true, starting with the original Sonic the Hedgehog and going all the way up to Sonic and Knuckles before working on anything unrelated to the chili dog loving blue mascot. Even so, those other experiments aren't too surprising, with a couple puzzle titles like Puyo Pop and Choo Choo Rocket gaining a good deal of popularity in their own right. And of course there's the Phantasy Star series. However, would you believe that Team Sonic decided to develop a rhythm game called Samba de Amigo, in which the player shook maracas into the beat? Well, believe it or not, it's true. While it originally came out in the year 2000, it even got a port to the Wii in the 2007 thanks to Gearbox Software. Number 9, BioWare. The first company on this list known for their RPGs, this one of the Western variety, BioWare has been falling from grace as of late, or ever since the Mass Effect 3 depending on who you ask. Still, in their prime, they developed extremely influential titles like Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, The Old Republic, and Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. Yeah, that's right, BioWare created a Sonic game. Made for the DS, it was BioWare's first ever handheld title, and apparently the team were fans of Sonic and the franchise and wanted to bring their own flavor to the series. The gameplay was not at all like a typical Sonic game, instead split between exploration and a more traditional turn-based battle system. While the game as a whole was received well enough, sitting at a 74 Metacritic rating, the writing and story was a little bit more debated. Number 8, Crystal Dynamics. Known now for the rebooted Tomb Raider series, and before that the Legacy of Kain and Gex series, Crystal Dynamics has actually been developing games for quite a while. Many people compare the newer Tomb Raider games to Naughty Dog's Uncharted, but for another similarity between the studios is that they both worked on the 3DO. However, Crystal D's first ever game, Crash and Burn, was actually a launch title for the system. While that racing game is a little odd for what we know for the studio as today, there's an even more bizarre inclusion in their list of games. Their follow-up to the game Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver, was none other than Walt Disney World Quest Magical Racing Tour. That mouthful of a title was another attempt to ride that Mario Kart craze with a themed kart racer, this time featuring tracks inspired by Disney World attractions such as Big Thunder Mountain Railroad and the Haunted Mansion. One odd choice was only to include Chip, Dale, and Jiminy Cricket as playable Disney characters, with the rest of the playable characters being original creations. Number 7, Bethesda. Bethesda has been around a long time, perhaps longer than some may think. Their first game ever released was Gridiron in 1986, and they've been going strong ever since, though only really starting to become the giant we know today once starting their Elder Scrolls series. Before that though, they had a few titles that don't exactly fit with the MO they've built for themselves. Going in chronological order, in 1988, they developed Wayne Gretzky Hockey. I know I personally never would have guessed Bethesda would have made a sports game, but they actually took a stab at a couple different sports titles in the late 80s and early 90s. They also took on a odd license in the form of Home Alone for the NES, as well as Where's Waldo. Two IPs that are bizarre enough to know got games at all, let alone ones developed by Bethesda of all studios. Number 6, Bungie. Halo and Destiny. These two franchises have been the sole focus of Bungie for almost 2 decades now, and have since become well respected for their innovations in helping bring FPS games to the mainstream in the console market. Not to mention what Halo 2's matchmaking system did for online play. Those a little older may still associate them with their RTS games, Myth, or maybe their earliest FPS franchise, Marathon. But one title in their history sticks out from the rest: Oni, a third-person brawler with some gunplay, with distinctive Eastern influences in art style. Aside from the sci-fi setting and general inclusion of guns, Oni shares almost nothing in common with what Bungie had done or would go on to do. Number 5. Blizzard. Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo, Overwatch, Hearthstone. These juggernaut IPs are what Blizzard has built their incredible empire on. But there was a time before they established their own world and lore to build upon for decades, and they took on an existing license to make their debut under the name of Blizzard Entertainment, formerly going by Silicon and Synapse. That existing license was none other than Superman, with the game The Death and Return of Superman. Not only would this be a far cry from the typical genre Blizzard would be pioneers in, but also one of the only 2 games they've ever released as console exclusives, the other being the fighting game Justice League Task Force, another game I'd never guessed Blizzard had made. Their Superman game, as you've been seeing, was in the classic side-scrolling beat-em-up genre that let players take control of various incarnations of Superman, including the classic Superman, Cyborg Superman, Eradicator, Steel, and Superboy. Number 4. Rare. The iconic studio that defined many of our childhoods with colorful worlds, catchy music, iconic characters, but most of all an ungodly amount of collectibles, Rare really established their brand in the 90s and early 2000s. But, as those who played the Rare replay already know, the studio has been making games ever since 1986. Their first game, Versus Slalom, was exactly what you'd expect: a slalom game on the NES. Rare stuck to mostly sports, racing, and game show games for a while, until they decided to start experimenting. I'm not sure which of these games is the most surprising for Rare, so I'll let you decide. First up is WWF WrestleMania, the first ever WWF licensed NES game, and the second WWF game ever made. The second is the 2 educational Sesame Street games, and third, which is my personal pick, Taboo, The Sixth Sense. Labeled as a non-game, Taboo is a tarot card reading simulator, which, after gathering player information including their name, birth date, gender, and state they live in, will generate lottery numbers. As if that wasn't weird enough, it is also the only game on the NES to have 2 warnings, one stating the game is for players 14 years and older, and the second is that it is for entertainment purposes only. Number 3. Square. Square Enix, formerly Squaresoft, is to many the Final Fantasy company, and while that is certainly an exaggeration, it isn't hard to see why people associate them only with the JRPGs. They basically were the reason the genre even became popular in the West. But they didn't start out making Final Fantasy. As the name implies, the company was actually falling on some pretty hard times, and so this game could have been their last, hence their name Final Fantasy. Before that point, Square seemed to be throwing a lot of weird concepts at the wall to see what stuck, such as the 3D Battle of World Runner, a third-person rail shooter of sorts, and Rad Racer, which is exactly what it sounds like. Even after Final Fantasy proved to be a success, and the company was in the process of turning it into a franchise, some other oddities and experiments came out, and by far the weirdest is yet another license, this time called Square's Tom Sawyer. To make it even more confusing, this was a Japanese exclusive based on the Mark Twain novel, but played like a traditional Square RPG for the time. Perhaps it is best this game was never localized and is mostly forgotten, since it was ranked the 4th most racist game in history by UGO in 2010. Number 2. Naughty Dog. Naughty Dog is not shy about their past, as evidenced by the inclusion of a level of the original Crash Bandicoot game in Uncharted 4. Ever since the Uncharted series, though, the studio has moved away from their more mascot-centered, family-friendly platformer-styled games like Crash and Jak and Daxter, and into more grounded and adult-themed stories and adventures. But, even excluding their experimentation into the kart and racing genre, there is one type of game from way back that I never expected to see, but also never expected to see again. A fighting game. Way of the Warrior was released back in 1994 for the 3DO of all systems, and developed as the studio was on the verge of going bankrupt. Things were so bad that they had to ask friends to play the main characters, and couldn't even afford a chroma key system, instead improvising by gluing a yellow sheet of paper to one of the developer's apartment walls. While the graphics and animations did end up getting some praise, overall reviews were negative. Still, Way of the Warrior was the first fighting game on the system, and was in the top 10 selling games on the system for a while. Number 1. From Software. Ever since Hideki Miyazaki and From Software released the cult hit Demon's Souls, the studio has been firmly established as pioneers of their particular style of game that has come to be known as Soulsborne. Even before the Souls series, though, the studio's games leading up to those style of games does make a logical progression, with their first games ever developed being the 3 Kingsfield games, and later working on the Armored Core series. However, in between their adventure through hardcore fantasy and science fiction, they took a detour on the lighter side with the game The Adventures of Cookie and Cream. This PS2 game featured 2 bunnies named Cookie and Cream on a journey, either in single or multiplayer co-op, to find the missing moon by progressing through a series of obstacle-filled stages requiring both bunnies to work together to reach the end. As you can see, this game is quite a far cry from the usual tone and style From Software is known for, but was fairly well received, though not nearly to the extent of any of their Souls games. Thanks for watching my first top 10 video. Let me know if you'd like me to do some more of these top 10 videos in the comments, and of course feel free to leave suggestions too. Next episode, in preparation for the release of Bloodstained, we'll be taking a look at Koji Igarashi's Castlevania series, so subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. In the meantime, you can check out some of my other videos you have missed, for even more gaming trivia I know you'll like.